So good to be here with all of you guys. And as Daniel said, my name is Nate Otey. I'm an associate in the Harvard Department of Philosophy and lead instructor for ThinkerAnalytix. We are a nonprofit that partners with the Department of Philosophy, and we teach skills of logical reasoning and intellectual charity. So my big pitch for you all today is that there's this tool called argument mapping. It's really fun, and we can use it to help students practice the skills of intellectual charity. So what I thought we'd do is just jump right in by mapping an argument together. And what better, more controversial topic than whether pineapple belongs on pizza. And what I'm going to do here is just show you how to use a software tool that we use at ThinkerAnalytix called MindMup. It's a free open source tool that you can use with students, either to do a little kind of class discussion about a topic in the manner that we'll do now, as well as to help them practice mapping arguments in course text, which we'll also look at just a little bit later on. And I've also got a tutorial on how to use this that I will drop a link in the chat for you guys so that you can explore it on your own. But just don't worry so much about the software. I just want you to kind of like feel what it's like to have a conversation about a controversial issue using this tool. So as Daniel said, we'd like to keep this like interactive. I know some of you guys are like probably driving or something, but if you're able to either unmute yourself and chime in, or you can drop in the chat. I've got a claim here that pineapple belongs on pizza, and in an argument, right, we want to support a claim with reasons and evidence. So I'm hoping that some of you out there are pineapple enthusiasts, and you might be willing to stick up for this claim. Could you offer a premise or a reason to believe that pineapple belongs on pizza? And then I'll show you how we can go about mapping that. So anybody willing to stick up for pineapple?
Yeah, I like pineapple on pizza.
Great. Is that Quentin?
It is, yes.
Great. Could you tell us why?
No, I mean, my reason for saying that it belongs on pizza is that that's what I enjoy. I like it.
Great. So Quentin's given us a reason, and the reason is that Quentin enjoys pineapple on his pizza. Mm-hmm. Great. Quentin, would you be able to formulate that reason in a way that someone else might find that would give someone else a reason to believe that pineapple belongs on pizza?
No, because I don't care whether other people have pineapple on pizza.
Great. Okay.
So it's not meant to be a persuasive argument. It informs my decision making when I'm ordering pizza. It's not, I have no intention of persuading anyone else to like it. I expect other people will either try it or not try it and form their own opinions.
Great.
Seems to me to be a very individual thing.
Great. Sounds like you're a hardcore relativist about pizza. Is there anybody else out there who might be willing to offer additional support for the claim that pineapple belongs on pizza? Maybe make a bolder argument than Quentin's argument from personal taste. Yeah, Meg.
I would argue that pineapple does a nice job of breaking up fats because it's acidic. And so if you have cheese on your pizza, that can oftentimes create a sense of feeling clogged. And pineapple will emulsify the cheese.
Well, that was a lot of big words. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to keep up with what you just said there, Meg. Thank you. So I'm just trying to make sure that I'm understanding exactly what you're arguing here. So you're arguing that pineapple breaks up the fats on the pizza because pineapple is acidic. Is that right?
That's correct.
Great. And so
it's a digestive aid.
Oh, great. Because it's acidic?
Yes.
Okay, so the acids serve as a digestive aid to breaking up the fats, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so what I just want everyone to notice that I'm doing here is I'm trying to capture Meg's reasoning. And what I've done is I've noticed that the fact that pineapple is acidic is being offered as a support for why we should believe that pineapple breaks up the fats on the pizza. Mm-hmm. And this is what we call a co-premise, which is to say, it explains the reasoning, or if you're a logician, this kind of completes the syllogism, right, to allow us to arrive at the inference here. And then, Meg, did you have an explanation of why it's a good thing that pineapple breaks up the fat on the pizza? Is it because it improves the taste, or is it a health thing? Or
I was going to say that my taste is I always feel better when I'm eating, when I don't feel as if I'm clogging my arteries. So I think my taste buds are enhanced by the feeling that my arteries are getting a digestive aid in the same bite.
Okay, so if I got you correct here, you're saying that the reason it's a good thing that pineapple breaks up the fats is because it enhances the taste. And maybe a reason to believe that it enhances the taste is the taste buds don't fear for the arteries or something?
Exactly. They are concerned, the taste buds.
Right.
I have to disagree with that. I think our taste buds are absolutely not concerned with our arteries. Indeed, our taste buds evolved to get us the maximum fat and sugar in our diets at a time when we were at much greater risk of starvation than we were of dying of overeating. And the whole overeating problem has arisen far too recently in our history to have been impacted our evolution in any way.
Where's the chair?
Great. So I'm a philosopher, not an evolutionary biologist, but I gather that the objection is something like, well, the fact that this will enhance the taste doesn't necessarily do anything for our arteries in this case. And so what I think what Quentin has done is given us an objection. So what I want everyone to notice is that we can add an objection to our argument map, which is a reason not to believe something. So in particular, I think Quentin has identified that this inference may not be super strong. And we can formulate the objection to the inference as something like, our taste buds are supposed to be at odds with our arteries, or are historically at odds with our arteries, something like that, Quentin?
Our taste buds seek maximum, maximum, not optimum nutrition.
Great. More big words. I love it. Thank you. All right. So I just want everyone to notice that I can add an objection to an inference here. So it's not necessarily that we're denying the truth of the premise. It's that we're denying the relevance of the premise to the claim above it. Hopefully I've done you justice there, Quentin. I want to hear if anybody else either can give us an additional reason to believe that pineapple belongs on pizza, or stick up for the argument as it's already presented, or if someone else has a different objection, if there are any pineapple haters out there who would like to take issue with this.
I'm both of those things. I'm both a pineapple hater, and I want to support Quentin's argument that pineapple belongs on pizza because he enjoys it.
Great.
Because I think the justification for that is if even one person, and given that pineapple is not bad for anybody, that if even one person enjoys it, then it belongs on pizza, even if it was dangerous.
Yes, it belongs on my pizza,
but
not yours.
But I think I'm trying to take it one step further, which is that as representing anybody who likes pizza, who likes pineapple on pizza, immediately makes it clear that pineapple belongs on pizza because one person likes it.
Unless,
we're not arguing that it has to be on pizza. I would have a different position if it said pineapple has to be on pizza. That would be a different thing for me.
Yeah, so it belongs in this case means, is a necessary component of pizza, then I would join Carrie.
Then I would object.
Great. So with that caveat, what I want everyone to notice is that what I think Carrie has done for us is supplied what we call a missing co-premise, or spelled out a hidden assumption. And as many of you will have noticed in conversations, perhaps with students, often the places where we seem to talk past each other are these hidden assumptions that we carry, and many of them are normative assumptions, or they're assumptions about values. And in this case, there was a hidden assumption in Quentin's argument, which, if produced in the way that Carrie did, actually makes this a very strong inference. It's not to say that the premises are true, and in particular, you might wonder whether this premise is true, but you can notice that the conclusion just follows straightforwardly from the premises when they're presented this way, right? So if it's true that Quentin enjoys pineapple on his pizza, and let's grant, based on his testimony that, the testimony of Quentin that that's true, and if it's true that if even one person enjoys pineapple on pizza, then it belongs on pizza, then it just follows as a matter of logic that pineapple belongs on pizza. And you might think that this is what we call a deductive inference, right? Or a valid inference. I know there are probably some like logicians in the room who might press on whether this inference is strictly valid, but I want everyone to notice that it's a very strong inference. And really what we've now done is we've isolated where someone might disagree, right? Because really the thing that we would debate about is not whether Quentin enjoys pineapple, but rather whether that licenses us to say that it belongs on pizza, perhaps in a more universal sense. So this thing here is the thing that we might actually disagree about if we disagreed with the argument. So maps are useful for helping us distinguish between evaluating whether an inference is strong or weak and evaluating whether a premise is true or false. And that's a kind of move that we often want students to make when we're discussing a topic or when we're analyzing a course text.
I would say that the only potential problem, I don't think it applies here, with Carrie's premise is when you are changing your terms. If, for example, I say, well, I like my pizza with just pineapple, no bread, no cheese, no tomato sauce, then people might say, well, that's not pizza then. That's pineapple.
Right. A no true Scotsman type argument.
Yeah.
Yeah. A no true pineapple. Yeah. Great. Now, Carrie, did you also want to place an objection on this argument, or were you just trying to stick up for Quentin in the spirit of intellectual charity?
No, Quentin persuaded me. I hate pineapple on pizza, but Quentin persuaded me that pineapple belongs on pizza for that very reason that I said.
Because
Great.
Quentin likes it.
Yeah, it doesn't belong on my pizza, but sure, I can agree that it belongs on pizza.
Great. Meg is also referenced in the chat that that Aristotle might say the excellence of good eating habits is its own reward. That's right. Anybody else want to chime in on this before I take us back into thinking about intellectual charity more broadly? I'd love to hear if there's any other pineapple haters out there.
Baba, you have your hand up.
Yes, I had my hand up. I was going to argue that because there's a precedent for other fruit on pizza, namely tomatoes. So if tomatoes belong on pizza, so does pineapple.
Great. Perhaps an argument from precedent. Okay, so what we have here is that other fruit belongs on pizza, right? And then we have the example of tomatoes. And then we might say, okay, well, if other fruit belongs on pizza, and so does pineapple. Forgive my spelling, but oh yeah, there we go. So hopefully everyone can see once again that this is a fairly tight little syllogism, right? And so we could discuss whether we think the premises are true, but at least we can see that they work together to support the main claim. And then what I've done is I've mapped them separately over here because I took it to be a separate line of reasoning in support of the main claim. In other words, even if you didn't like this piece of reasoning, or if you didn't like Quentin's argument, you might still find this argument persuasive. They're logically independent. And in a map, we can visualize that quite straightforwardly with just having these separate support connections. Okay, so I just wanted to do that to kind of get us warmed up and to introduce you to this cool thing called argument mapping. And if you kind of zoom out and just think about it for a second, I wanted to notice some features of the discussion that we just had. One of those features is that we were able to be a lot more precise in the conversation that we were having, because we could point at different boxes and different inference lines. And if we were all in the same room, this would be even more the case. And it allows us to be more rigorous about evaluating the logic of the arguments, in particular, because we can distinguish between inferences and premises. And also, it's just easier to keep track of the argument. You know, when you're having a discussion with people and you're like, wait, you just lose the thread, right? Like, so if we decide that this isn't true, then what does that mean about what we should believe about the main claim? But argument maps reduce cognitive load by just holding it all steady right in front of you. And then finally, this issue wasn't particularly controversial, but many issues, of course, are controversial that we want to discuss with other people and with students. And by sharing this map, it's very clear that what we're doing is we're discussing the topic and not sort of adversarially sitting across from each other, trying to decide whether we think each other is like a good person or something, right? So we're evaluating the truth of a premise or the strength of an inference, but we're not sort of pointing at each other or thinking about each other in terms of our dignity or our value or something like that. We're sharing this common space and a common framework for having the conversation. And that provides quite a bit of safety for students when you want to have these conversations that are more challenging. To be able to refer constantly to the map is really useful.
So I shouldn't argue that people who hate tropical fruits necessarily hate people from tropical climates.
Yeah, that'd be a weak inference. That's right. Great. So if you have any other questions about using MindMap, I'll just drop it now. We have this nifty tutorial, and I'll drop the link in the chat for you guys right now so that you can explore it if you like. Let's see, where's the chat? Great. So this is about intellectual charity, right? And that's what Heterodox Academy is about. Just a brief overview of what we'll do. We already mapped controversial issue. I want to briefly discuss what the skills of intellectual charity are, why to be charitable. Maybe we'll have a little time. We can talk about when not to be charitable or the limits of charity. And then I'll make the case for why argument mapping helps. And if we have some time, we'll try mapping another argument for a genuinely controversial position. And I'll leave you guys with some resources at the end. And as we go, please feel free to drop things in the chat or interrupt me or ask questions. I'd like to keep this interactive, and we'll be sure to get you out of here by the end of the hour. So this is from the HXA way, which is the Heterodox Academy kind of list of best practices. And the way they describe intellectual charity, they use the phrase steel manning rather than straw manning. And some of you may have heard that phrase before. I like that. And you may be familiar with the idea of straw manning an argument, which is to construct a weak version of an argument. We all tend to do this. It's a fallacy, but we tend to do this almost automatically with arguments that we disagree with. We interpret them in a less plausible way, right? So to be charitable is to take a stronger or even the strongest form of position that you disagree with. And we could sort of get into the weeds on what the strongest form might mean. But the kind of like litmus test for this, or the ideological Turing test, is to be able to formulate the argument so that the person you're talking to would agree with it, right? I tried to model this just a little bit just now with the pineapple discussion by asking someone, okay, I think this is what you're saying. Did I get that right? Did I understand you correctly? And you don't want to like sort of put words in someone else's mouth. You want to try to formulate it in a way that they will in fact agree with. This is surprisingly simple and very easy to do, and will really transform your discussions. If you just stop before you criticize a view, just try to articulate it and check if you've accurately understood what the person is trying to communicate. People who do marriage counseling will tell you the same thing, although I've never done marriage counseling. They seem to know that that's a useful skill. And then finally, look for reasons why beliefs others hold may be compelling, under the assumption that others are roughly as reasonable, informed, and intelligent as oneself. A different professor we work with at Harvard says, try not to assume that other people are stupid, evil, or deranged. All right. So we kind of try to summarize that for students as treat other people's arguments like you want them to treat yours, right? Nobody likes to be strawmanned, and nobody finds it very enjoyable to have other people fail to take you seriously. So try to treat other people in the same manner. And it's worth asking, like, why practice charity, right? Because I like being right. I like winning arguments. I usually think that I have something important to say. And sometimes I think that other people are not only like mistaken, but like genuinely malevolent or malicious, or that they shouldn't even be given a platform for their views. So it's really worth exploring with students, and you can open this as a conversation with students. Like, should we practice charity? And if so, why? So I've got some thoughts, but actually I'm interested what you all have to say. What do you think are the most persuasive reasons to be charitable?
A friend of mine always says that he likes to win arguments, and he would always win arguments with both of his ex-wives. I don't think that there's something to be learned from that.
Great. So sometimes when you win, you lose. Yep.
Yep, I think so.
Anybody else? See people posting in the chat here. Why be charitable? To arrive at the truth, right? Without charity, truth remains elusive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Sandra.
Nate, looks like you might have a hand up from Howard also.
Yeah, go for it, Howard.
Yeah, because we cannot be 100% sure that we are right just because the argument feels right.
Good. So it sounds like you're tracking along the same lines as Sandra in terms of seeking truth, right? And, yeah, right. Like, what are the chances that I have the bucket of all true beliefs? It's more likely that there's a lot of things I don't know and that I'm mistaken in some of my beliefs. And so by being charitable and listening carefully to other people, perhaps I'll learn something. And Mark also made mention of learning something new. Do you guys think that that's particularly compelling to your students? Like, would the sort of appeal to like believe true things, would that resonate with your students enough to make them want to do some work to be charitable?
It seems to me that the more compelling argument is the one that you put on the previous slide, which is, treating other people's arguments like you want them to treat yours. That is, you have something that you believe in strongly. You want them to take you seriously and understand why you're making that argument and that you care about it. And, in order to do that, the best way is to also give that chance to an opposing or other arguments as well. That seems like what would be more compelling to students I've interacted with than a truth claim.
Sure, sort of ethical duty or an ethical appeal.
Mm.
Yeah, Carrie.
Well, I think off of that I think more and more young people are aware that everybody holding on to their truth isn't helping us move forward. And that to move forward, we might have to create something other than what each of us believes. And that to do that, you have to be charitable in the ways you're saying. And I also wonder, one thing you could say is, what does it mean to win an argument if all you're doing is you're each maintaining the position you started with? How is that winning is another question I think that gets raised when you talk about not being charitable, right? It's like, I'm just going to keep restating my point and you're going to keep stating your point. Why don't we just stop here?
Totally.
Which I also think students have had that experience often over and over again. So
yeah. Martha. Oh, you're muted, I think, or I'm having trouble hearing you, Martha. Doesn't look like you're muted. The audio isn't coming in. Okay, maybe we'll come back to you, Martha. I see that Tanya posted, I disagree respectfully. Thank you, Tanya. I don't think it would dissuade my students from things they feel very strongly about. And then Dawn pointed out that understanding other people's views can make you more persuasive.
Okay, I think I fixed my
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got you.
Okay, well, I'm just recently retired, but I used to teach English and argumentation was a big portion of our curriculum, and I was a debate coach. And I guess at least with my student population, I saw an increasing impatience with the incivility that we are facing in society. And yes, sure, especially in their immaturity, kids wanted to, out of ego, win the argument. That is kind of this tendency of human beings. But the point of persuasion, if you want to be Aristotelian about it, is to move society forward. I think that's what Carrie was saying, and so one of the greatest reasons to practice charity goes back to the idea of true progress, of understanding what Mill said about we know little of our own side if we don't really understand the other side. And so I think intellectual charity is something that I have really worked hard to teach, and I decided to join the webinar today because I'm still collaborating at times with my former teammates about what they are doing. And I thought this was one thing I could do to possibly help them, is find a new tool.
Great. Thanks, Martha. Yeah, I think you're right that there is a broad interest among students. They are very disenchanted with the current state of the world politically. And you might notice that like many of our, especially our younger students, may literally have never seen a conversation go well, right? They may literally have never seen people genuinely disagree in a manner that turned out to be productive or useful. If they've never seen it on social media, almost certainly. And they may never have seen it at the dinner table or in a classroom. So thank you all for pitching in. I had many of the same reasons that you all mentioned. And I think perhaps the best tack is to offer students sort of a menu of reasons for why they might practice charity, and different reasons are going to appeal to different students. So there's a sort of like ethical appeal, right? Like treat other people you want the way you want them to treat you, or just sort of like for the sake of democracy or something like that, right? Like because, progress depends on it, or our political system depends on it. And that will motivate some students, but when I was in college, certainly I was much more self-interested. The believe true things will definitely appeal to a certain subset of students. You can also just point out that people will like you more because people like people who listen to them, and people tend to reciprocate the way they're treated. So if you listen carefully to them, people will listen carefully to you. And I do think you can appeal to people that, you'll be more persuasive, right? So that's what I was interested in, as a young philosophy student. I just wanted to know how to win arguments. And I think you can point out for students that you'll be more persuasive to other people because you can formulate your arguments in terms that are likely to appeal to them if you listen carefully to them, right? Now, of course, there's other intellectual virtues that you also want to exercise and that we can practice and instill in students. For example, the virtues of intellectual humility, curiosity. You might think that there's a virtue to something called intellectual tenacity, which is like, I don't just fold as soon as someone objects to my argument, a sort of lazy relativism or just an unwillingness to defend a claim. These are the other virtues that we want to instill in students, right? But my point is just, you can kind of give students a few different reasons to practice charity and just see what sticks. And some students are going to be like, they're really kumbaya, and that's appealing. And some students are really interested in winning. And I think you can thread a needle there a little bit, at least in my experience. I want to keep going, but feel free to complain about what I just said in the chat or to add any additional reasons to be charitable. I thought we could also briefly touch on when not to be charitable. And this is another conversation that you can invite with students with a little bit of scaffolding. So I don't think that it's the case that we always need to be charitable to everyone or to every view, right? Sometimes people really are trolling, right? Sometimes people really aren't interested in having a good faith conversation. And so, it's one thing when we're in a classroom and we're asking students to discuss a text, but sort of out in the world, maybe is like the bigger issue of like when and how to be charitable, right? So I've just sort of imagined in a very loose way a sort of spectrum that, it's not linear, but if you could just bear with me a little bit here. I think there are certain very high stakes topics about which we don't necessarily need to carefully consider and listen to people's views, right? So like I was recently in Turkey, and there's a lot of denialism of the Armenian genocide there, right? And I ended up in a conversation with a Turkish guy, and he was kind of propagating this view, and it was really, I wasn't sure about whether to like even try to listen to it, because you might think that there are views that are so kind of beyond the pale that they're not only mistaken or wrong, but that they're a guise for a form of injustice that's so grave that we shouldn't even give them a platform. I'm going to kind of bucket that on the one side. And then on the other side, there's topics that are so kind of tame that even though they may be controversial, they're very low stakes, right? So is a hot dog a sandwich? Is water wet? Does pineapple belong on pizza? The internet, exists for these things, but it's not likely to actually, cause serious offense. And then there's like this kind of gray area somewhere in the middle where you have kind of families of topics that it's not really clear exactly, and you really need some kind of judgment about when to exercise charity and when to sort of kind of end the conversation, right? So you might think climate change denial, vaccine misinformation, gun rights. These could be topics where there's a lot at stake socially, and that people's lives could be on the line, or there could be some harm involved. But it's not really clear exactly when and how you might always want to be charitable. I'm just trying to help students explore the limits, right? And then there's another kind of bucket of topics that are related to personal identity issues. And I've noticed with topics like these, affirmative action, transgender athletes, immigration restrictions, these have all been in the news a lot lately. Frequently, it's the case that at least one party in the discussion believes themselves to be making a good faith, rational argument, and they actually have everyone's interests in mind. And someone else involved in the discussion perceives this person as making a sort of claim that is pernicious enough to be an attack on someone's identity or to undermine someone's identity claim. And that's when it starts to get a little bit tricky, because I've been in the middle of watching conversations where it seems like one person thinks that the other person is like either being hateful or prejudiced or bordering on hate speech, but the other person takes themselves to be arguing in good faith. And I'm sure you've all seen this as well. And in that case, once again, it's not always clear, whether and how we ought to be charitable. So I will kind of pause briefly here and invite any comments on this. And again, this isn't intended to be a sort of like linear spectrum or exhaustive by any stretch. I just wanted to point out that there's like things that we definitely should and can practice charity, and there's things where maybe we don't need to. Then there's a lot of confusion in the middle.
I'd say the thing about the highest stakes here is that sometimes, even if people are arguing in good faith, it just isn't worth your time. And you could say things for stuff that's somewhat less consequential, like the flat Earth claims. I'm sure if I went onto YouTube, I could find people making a flat Earth claim that I wasn't able to refute off the top of my head, because I'm not an expert in that field. I don't think it is therefore incumbent on me to watch those videos and then go and find someone who is an expert in that field and say, look, I'm sure this argument is wrong, but I don't know why. Can you tell me what's wrong with it?
Right.
Equally, in the UK, there's a historian, David Irvin, who is, I think, a genuine expert in the history of Nazi Europe, and is a professor at a university and teaches that, who is a Holocaust denier. He, I'm sure, knows more about the topic than I do. He could produce arguments which I wouldn't know how to refute off the top of my head. But I'm not going to invest the time in finding out what's wrong with his arguments. It's not worth my while.
Yep. I'm really glad you brought that up, Quinn, because that also is a kind of, we invite students to consider your personal resources. Like, right, we don't have the time of day to necessarily engage every person. So you can ask students, it's a little bit of this kind of like social emotional type, like pulse check for yourself, right? Like, how much emotional bandwidth do I have? How upset am I right now in this moment? And how much time do I have to talk to this person? And then by the same token, consider your interlocutor. First of all, how likely is it that I might actually be able to influence this person, right? Like, if I'm talking to a flat earther, not only might it take me a lot of time to even understand what they're saying, but how committed are they to this belief, and what's the chances that I could sort of disabuse them of it, or learn something from this conversation? Dawn pointed out in the chat that a student said, I still think there's opportunity for me to engage with people who don't believe in my views, but I also am tired of having to be vulnerable for the chance that someone might believe in marginalized people's humanity. Right. So another thing that comes up frequently, especially if you're talking about these identity-related topics, you might wonder whether people who have been historically marginalized or otherwise mistreated ought to be responsible for sort of sticking up for a claim, or even participating in a conversation like this with someone who might be advancing a view that could be seen as marginalizing or failing to recognize their humanity. And that's tricky, right? And I wouldn't presume to necessarily require students in that circumstance to always persist in that conversation. And some of those are judgment calls that, of course, you'll have to make as instructors, but you could at least invite this conversation before you have that conversation with students. This bit here is about the 2-strike rule. So this is just something that I was talking to a friend who's a professor about, like, how do you sort of decide whether to engage in a conversation? And you might think that like the default should be, you should have an open mind toward learning something from this person, that they're in good faith. And then maybe give them one good chance to prove they're in good faith. Like if you start to suspect that they're kind of trolling or that they're not really listening to you. And then if they kind of double down on their apparently pernicious claim, or if they simply seem to be, they kind of prove themselves uninterested in a good faith conversation, then you can sort of decide that it's not worth your time and remove yourself from the conversation. So it's just a really crude heuristic for when and how to kind of decide whether to involve yourself. A 2-strike rule. If you don't like that rule, please, or if you don't like what it's called, please give me a better suggestion in the chat. That'd be great. Ryan asks, questioning one's humanity is rather vague. Can you elaborate? Yeah, great question. So I've noticed that there are many topics where, for example, if we're talking about increasing immigration restrictions, right? You might think that people could worry that if, like, let's say I was in favor of increasing immigration restrictions, that it's based on a failure to respect the humanity of people who would immigrate or who might desire to immigrate. You might think that it's a sort of a type of xenophobia or racism. And what makes it especially tricky is, of course, many people who are in fact xenophobic or racist might also argue for immigration restrictions, right? And so that could be one way in which someone's humanity could be questioned. And then it's not even clear, without context, whether that's what's going on, right? Similarly, in discussions related to race and gender issues, this is frequently, there's a sense that people's identity or identity characteristics are at stake, and that they won't be taken seriously or respected in the conversation. Martha, go ahead and hop in, and then I do want to, we can linger here if you guys want to, but I have a few other things I want to get to. Go for it, Martha.
Well, I would argue as long as the person is of a mature enough level and at the time of the engagement feels like they have the emotional bandwidth and the time to engage, that the things that you listed in the broad social harm and the identity column are the exact reason why in our world today we need to exercise intellectual charity. Because I think often what you were just talking about assumptions about motives and warrants behind people's positions leads to this breakdown and leads to the incivility that we suffer with. And that by exercising some intellectual charity and engaging with people about their questioning on climate science or their discomfort on any number of social issues, CRT, something like that, we begin to understand them. And it is when we begin to understand them that we can actually reach them from where they are and bring them hopefully to another place. And maybe we learn something, along the way, though we think we have nothing to learn. But when we assume ill will on behalf of all those people in those middle categories, then we just feed into the incivility, and they may actually perceive us as violating the 2-strike rule and not having good faith in even hearing them. Thanks for listening.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Martha. And I've often wondered like whether it's even possible to have a genuinely charitable conversation on, say, social media, right? Because so much of the way our information ecosystem is designed is, of course, to stir this kind of antagonism, and it's the opposite of charity, right? It's fear and anger and in group and out group. so you might also just open a conversation with students about the manner and the method of the conversation, right? So if we're speaking face to face, it's just that much easier to respect your humanity and take you seriously and listen. And also, you mentioned motives, right? So it's much easier somehow psychologically to attribute really terrible motives to like people on the internet, and when you're talking to someone in person, it's a little harder to think that they really are just trying to ruin your day, although sometimes you feel that way, and sometimes they really are trying to ruin your day. Meg, go for it, and then I'll keep us rolling.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I just thought this is building on what Martha said. Besides teaching undergraduates, I also go around talking about the Bill of Rights, and the Second Amendment gets a lot of really strong passions happening. And a lot of times people feel like, wait, we can't just argue about the Second Amendment. People's lives are at stake, which then just starts to build that whole notion of we can't talk to each other about a pretty crucial part of our Constitution. And what I found helpful, and I think this is, Nate, what you're getting at, is if I go into a room, and oftentimes the people who show up for these talks are very pro gun rights and feel that a college professor is going to just tell them they're crazy. But my job is just to say, okay, let's get the best arguments out first. So what do you find to be the most compelling arguments for an armed citizenry? Put them on the flip chart. And then if we came up with 6 reasons for having an armed citizenry, what are the best arguments for not having an armed citizenry? And just that real simple motion, I always think of like freedom is as big as my head. The back of my head is where I'm afraid and I'm like a reptile, and the front of my head is where I can be free. And the minute you get any group of people just having to decide what are the best arguments, everybody seems to go to the frontal cortex. So anyway, just to put it out there, I think Martha's point is sometimes we back away from topics when in fact they're the ones where we can really have the most intellectual fun, I'm tempted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Meg. I think that's right. And it's at least the case that by focusing on asking people to, what you're doing there is you're proving to them that you're taking them seriously. You're listening to them and allowing them to be heard. Right. And then you're also, I think the point about the stakes of the conversation is worth noticing. Like, there's something about our digital ecosystem that makes everything feel like it's really high stakes, like someone's going to be harmed somewhere by whatever it is that we say or do. And so we need to defend someone from something bad. And so that makes everything feel really high stakes, which makes it harder to talk about because we're all, using our amygdalas instead of our frontal lobe. And yes, the media do attribute terrible motives to people all the time. So I've already kind of like tried to sell you guys on argument mapping. Here's just the pitch again on why mapping is really helpful. And I think I've already said pretty much all of these things. So what I thought we could do, since we have just a little bit of time, is I wanted to show you a different sort of thing we can do with argument mapping, which is to map an argument as presented in a prose form. So go ahead and just digest this argument really quickly here, and then we'll try mapping it together. So with the pineapple pizza conversation, we were voicing our own views, and I was capturing those views into a map. In this case, what we'll do is we'll collaborate to map an argument that's presented in a prose form. And this is something you can do with students in small groups, or just have them do individually. And I did choose a topic that's somewhat controversial. And I also, I've got 2 different arguments here on the topic, although we'll probably only have time for this one. But I did deliberately choose an argument that I imagine at least some of you will take issue with or disagree with. So if you're finding yourself chafing against this argument, good. That's part of the intention here. All right, so hopefully you've had a chance to scan it, and I'm also just going to copy it over into our map canvas here so that we can work with it. So did anybody get the main claim of the argument? Let me go zoom in over here. that's usually the first thing we do when we try mapping an argument, is to just say what the main claim is. So can anybody tell me, what do you think is what's the main point of the argument? What's the primary thing the person is driving at?
The first sentence is actually the conclusion.
Are you sure?
That's what I think. It's saying that well, yes, I'm reasonably sure. They're saying that affirmative action policies are misguided. I mean, in a sense, that's the same as the last
right
sentence. The colleges shouldn't be using affirmative action policies.
Sure.
So it's a full circle.
The last sentence is the argument,
right? Right. So I'll just tell you kind of how I thought about this. If we had a whole class period, I would spend a while like unpacking the subtlety of this argument. The way I understood it was that the first sentence is a sort of introduction to the topic at hand, and it certainly is making a claim that they're well-meaning but misguided. This last sentence is slightly more precisely formulated. It's saying something a bit more specific, and it also makes use of this indicator word therefore, which is doing a lot of work for us. It's telling us that the preceding sentences are meant to provide a reason to believe this claim. So I took it that this was the main claim of the argument. So just for purposes of our interaction here, I'm gonna take that to be the main claim, that colleges should use a race-blind admissions process, and that this first sentence was a bit more a sort of a quick introduction to the topic, and making a similar claim to this last claim. Of course, when people write, they don't frequently give us kind of neat premise conclusion form. They just sort of, well, if you guys have ever read student essays, then you know what I'm talking about. So what are some premises that this author gives us? What are the reasons to believe the claim according to the author? I'd also love to hear from anybody we haven't heard from yet, if anybody's willing to jump in. But Ryan?
Well, one of the arguments that is put forth is that the stipulated purposes for the existence of the policies have failed to obtain. In other words, what it pretended to do in the first place didn't actually happen, so there's no reason to have them anyway.
Great. So I take it you're looking at this bit of the argument here. So after 50 years of these policies, oh, sorry. It says after 50 years of these policies, there's scant evidence that they actually help the minority groups that they're supposed to help.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So that's one sort of premise, according to this author, as to why colleges should use race-blind admissions processes. Great. Anybody else? What's a different reason to believe, according to the author?
Most Americans, according to polls, don't support the policies.
Great. So what I want everyone to notice is that this is being offered as an independent or a separate reason to believe, right? One clue is that indicator word also. It's doing a lot of sort of logical work for us. And it's telling us that, hey, here's a different reason to believe the main claim. So what I've done here is I've mapped them separately as independent premises. And if I were to, for example, if I were to have mapped it this way, that would be incorrect, right? Because this isn't offering a reason to believe that this is true. Rather, it's offering a separate reason to believe the main claim, okay? Now, we could also just do a brief exercise here to expose the hidden assumption here. So can anybody help me identify what is the unstated assumption that this author has that's supposed to get them from 2.8 to 1.4?
That these decisions should be made based, well, two, I think. One is that these decisions should be made based on a majority vote on some level. And two, that polling is the way you find out what people believe about something.
Sure. Yeah. So, right. Let's just take it for granted that the polls, in fact, show this, since that's baked into the claim here. I guess it's a typo. Yeah, polls show, right? So but the hidden assumption is something like, you know, colleges should do what, should make policy based on what the majority of Americans think, right?
Okay,
and
but
you could also,
the assumption you made of what I said was different than what I said. I wasn't saying that the polls did or did not show it. I was saying the assumption is that polling exposes what people think. That's an assumption about what polling does.
Right. All I was saying is that if the claim is formulated that polls show that most Americans do not favor,
I see what you're saying.
then that assumption is baked into the claim.
Yes, I see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're right. You're right. If the phrasing was polls suggest or polls, you know, report, then we would need a further assumption about the accuracy or the veracity of those polls. Great point. Okay, so what I just wanted everyone to see here was that this is an implicit assumption that you need to make this argument work. And if we were, right now we're just trying to map the argument, like, is it, you know, what is the structure? But we could easily turn to evaluating the argument and ask, like, is this any good, right? And you might think, no, this isn't a particularly strong premise, right? And in that case, we would find this line of reasoning weak. Similarly, you might think that this inference is strong or weak. And if we had more time, we could talk about whether it's strong or weak. But what I want you all to notice is that the task of simply trying to understand what is the argument as presented is forcing us to be charitable to it in a way that is almost automatically setting aside our own judgments about whether we find this convincing or our own opinion on the topic. So yeah, just like last thing, what's the last bit in the argument? I think Tanya already put it in the chat. It's this piece right here, right? And we got this indicator word finally. It says finally, these polls end up discriminating against Asian applicants, and Asian students must score significantly higher on these tests than applicants from other racial groups in order to have the same chances of admission. If we had more time, I'd kind of unpack this, but what this is what we call a subpremise, which is to say it's a reason to believe the claim above it. So the sort of correct way to map this is to put this claim underneath this claim, because it's being offered as a reason to believe that this claim is true. And that's what we call a sort of chain of support. And hopefully that's kind of intuitive, right? Because it looks a bit like a chain to have one premise supporting another premise, supporting the main claim. So yeah, once again, just this is a slightly different exercise. I promise it's more fun to do with students in a classroom in small groups, and they really get into it. And they will do this exercise really rigorously, no matter what their own views on the topic are. You know, and we've done these kinds of topics with students, and it's very easy for them to set aside their own kind of preconceptions about the topic and just try to, like, we're sharing this task now, which is like map the argument, right? And then we can get into evaluating it and deciding, you know, giving our opinion and deciding whether we think it's good. But whether we think it's good is almost irrelevant to the question of, like, whether, you know, this is a sub-premise or a co-premise. Yeah. Okay. Questions or comments on that?
I'm just wondering, is there a way also to show in the mind map what has been left out, which is often, I think, a big issue with any argument, like, because with this one, I just think about resources and, you know, all that resources that could be put into AA could be much possibly better into minority group schools to help them, you know, get better before they even get to uni.
Sure. Right. So you might say, okay, well, if we're concerned with the affirmative action process or the impact on minority students, then maybe we think about solving a problem from a different angle. Yeah, absolutely. That would go a little bit beyond the task of analyzing or evaluating the argument as presented. Although it could fall into the heading of evaluating it, right? Because you might think a weakness of an argument is that it fails to consider a better alternative. Sandra asked in the chat what software we're using. It's called MindMup, and I will just drop the link to our tutorial in here again for you guys. I will also drop the link to my slides here for you, and we might, I'll talk to Daniel, we might be able to make them available to you guys afterward as well, but I'll at least drop them in here right now. We've also got some links to some resources. We're getting to the top of the hour, so I'll let you go here. But these are some different resources and tools that ThinkerAnalytix, again, we're a nonprofit. We partner with Harvard's philosophy department. We've developed. If you're interested to learn more, we've built this interactive textbook to teach the skills that I showed you this afternoon. We've built an assignment called the Disagreement Project, where students discuss a controversial issue with someone in their life, and they're responsible for mapping it charitably and presenting it to the class. We've got a workbook on the intellectual charity skills. You've got my email address there, so please bother me, and I'll be happy to chat with you about how to use these skills and resources with your students. There's also some like more practice exercises on these lower slides about interpreting Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter charitably. So we didn't have time to get to those today, but if you want to explore them on your own, we certainly, they're available for you in the slides. So yeah, if you do got to hop, thanks for joining us since it is about that time. But I'm super happy to stick around and chat about Pineapple or the limits of charity or affirmative action policies or anything else that we talked about tonight. So please stick around and chat with me if you'd like to.